Hey everyone, welcome to Bedford Talks. This is the next episode, and I'm glad to have, I kind of feel like you're a new friend, Jason Burt. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for being here, being a guest on our show, and especially here in the Little Rock area. We're trying to do more interviews in the different markets that we have, and I know you've been in the Little Rock area pretty much your whole life.
Yes, yeah, born and raised here. Well, born in Newport, about an hour and a half north of here, but lived here since I was 2 weeks old, and started my business in '99 and been going at it ever since.
And what kind of work do you do primarily?
I bill myself as a corporate/commercial photographer. I wouldn't say in this market there's a lot of actual commercial as people think of it, as far as high-end product photography or things of that nature. But I do a lot of business with corporations and do a lot of business headshots of that nature, but also do advertising for billboards and things of that nature.
When did you get into this type of work? And then, so I know you went to college, but talk about your college years and then transitioning into the professional side.
Well, when I started college, I knew I wanted to be a photographer. I had worked on the high school yearbook like so many had. Volunteered my first day on campus, literally, for the yearbook. And by happenstance, I ended up getting the scholarship the second year for the newspaper. And the following year, I got the scholarship for the yearbook. And so I spent most of my days and nights going to any club event or anything that happened on campus. I was the guy that was there. And then I processed and developed and printed all of that myself for the deadlines. And moving out of college, I had taken an internship for one summer with the newspaper, so I was still kind of sticking to the journalism side of things. But then the following year, my degree required I had more of a business side internship, and a local studio was looking for somebody to do kind of administrative work and things of that nature, not necessarily shooting. And so I went and worked with him and then just didn't leave. I stayed with him for 5 years, started shooting weddings on the side for him and helping with special promotions for kids and things of that nature, and followed that on through to opening my business in 1999, which primarily started out, that was a portrait studio. So I started out with babies, high school seniors, families, weddings, things like that. But that was never really my love. I always wanted to do commercial work and things. And during a short stint that I actually worked for Bedford's, I kind of saw the trends change. It was right when digital cameras were kicking off and getting busy and selling a bunch. And I thought, everybody's going to become a photographer with this. And I saw that the best opportunity was for me to go work for businesses that had budgets and didn't want to mess with it themselves. They didn't want to do it in-house. They wanted to pay an expert to do that. And so that's when I started chasing more of that style work.
So everyone views the world differently. Is there a particular lens or a particular focal length that you tend to gravitate toward?
Not really. And I mentioned earlier off camera that that's interesting to me because while we do kind of have a style of that nature, the scope of my work is so wide that it's really just pick the tool that's best for what's being shot. I will say I kind of go to extremes with that. If I'm shooting an individual person or two people, something like that, I'm going to use a long lens. I'm going to use a pretty shallow depth of field. It's kind of standard, but that's also my look. That's what I do. But there's so many other shots that I do on a regular basis where I'm at the total opposite end. Give me my 17 millimeter and I'm going to get in your face with it because I like the close interaction. I like that feel, even if it might stretch and have some distortion. There's something about action photos if you can be in close instead of pulling them in from far. So I kind of stay on both sides of that spectrum, but ultimately it's just whatever the job at hand is what I'm going to pull from.
Just try to keep your options open at all times?
I do. My camera bag is heavy. I carry everything from the 17 to 35 to an 80 to 200. I keep a 24 to 120 is kind of my home go-to lens for about 80% of my work probably, because it just covers a good range and it's a nice sharp lens. But also right there beside it is a couple of tilt shift lenses because I need those on occasion, or various fast primes. So just everything.
So you're not even a primes guy or a zoom guy. I know that's a whole debate.
That is a whole debate. I would like the luxury of being a primes guy, but they're just so expensive for the really quality good ones that it's not practical for my business at this time to do that. So.
Well, and also, do you find yourself needing a 1.2 or a 1.4 prime all the time? If you're shooting with 24 to 70, well, 2.8 tends to do a pretty good job for separation.
Yeah, and the 24 to 120 that I use regularly is actually a f4. So its downside is that, but it's not so much from an exposure side, it is more of a viewfinder side. I shoot a lot of things that are pretty dark environments, and it's just downright hard to see through the camera at f4. But does that warrant a 1.2 lens when it's not the right focal length? So, you know, you just kind of give and take.
Exactly.
So, and I don't generally shoot anything wide open. I don't like that look. I like to have my lenses a little bit sharper. So if I need that shallower depth of field, I'm going to use a longer lens and back away, but still not necessarily shoot wide open. And that's why the f4 doesn't bother me on that lens, because I'm generally shooting at 5, 6, or 8 with it anyway.
Well, and I shot f4 for years. Mainly that was because that's what I could afford, you know, because you know the 24 to 105, the 24 to 120, you know, f4. I'm perfectly confident shooting f4.
Yes.
I mean, I've even done some headshots at f4 because that's what I had at the time.
Yep.
It was kind of a rush job. I was, you know, using somebody else's camera. It was a 24 to 70 f4 on the Z6,
Yep.
and you know, when I pulled it into Capture One, pulled it in full screen, it looked great.
Yeah.
You know, had that face tracking, had the eye detection, and you know, the camera did the focusing work for me.
And you'll notice if you shoot those at 2.8 with a 200, more times than not, you focused on the nose and the eyes aren't sharp. That's why I don't do it. I would rather have a little bit of fudge room to know that I've nailed that focus. And then, like I said, if I need a softer background, I just back up and zoom in.
Well, especially for a headshot, you know,
Exactly.
sure you can totally do it f8 or f10 if you need to. You know, that's really more for, I guess, getting dresses with more depth.
Yes.
But you know, for headshots, and we're talking this, f4, f8 is going to be perfectly acceptable.
Yeah. In fact, on my corporate headshots, which is kind of my bread and butter, I do a ton of corporate headshots. Most of those are shot at f11. I often use either a solid paper background, as we discussed earlier, or I'll use a traditional Old Masters. Those are painted out of focus, so I would rather just have the sharpness, crispness, front to back on my subject, and I'm not worried about the background.
Do you do much in the way of post-production on your images, or do you just kind of let them be what they are?
I generally strive for get it right in camera. I know that's kind of a phrase that people say a lot. I'm old school. I grew up on film where we didn't have the luxury of much editing or retouching, so you had to do it correctly, at least with exposure and somewhat color, because your film was daylight balanced. But now that we have the luxury, it's nice to be able to do some editing, but more times than not, my clients get almost exactly what I shot. I'm a raw shooter, so I will, you know, it takes away all of your colors and saturations and all the things that the JPEG automatically has. So I go in and I usually, I'll tweak the highlights if needed, or tweak a black point. I will tweak color just ever so slightly, kind of give it my flavor of saturation and balance and those kinds of things. And then after I do the lens profiles, I believe in those. I like those. But after I do that, I export it and that goes to the customer. And that's more times than not the amount of editing. I do have special requests come back after they see those. Oh, can you take this out, or can you do that? And we'll make some changes for them, but more times than not, they get it the way I shot it.
It saves you time. I mean, ultimately, and plus, I mean, you're not doing like high fashion or anything like that. So, you know, there's not really an expectation to make everything exactly perfect. Of course, you want to make them look as good as possible. Yes. But it is a relatively quick turnaround, especially if you shoot, you know, 30 to 80 employees in a day. You know, I've seen some people do that where they're just going through people, you know.
Yeah, and I do a lot of that. And so those things get almost an automated process. I will tweak the first image, sync across all the settings. I might even export with a filter like Portraiture or Portrait Pro, something of that, like that. And after that, that's it. But then on more of a one-off thing, I'll spend the time to, if it's one person's headshot, I'll spend the time to retouch. And even on the batches, if it's a glaring blemish or something like that needs to be removed, that takes no time to do. And I owe that to the customer to give them looking their best. But it also doesn't do me any good to sit there and spend 2 hours on a 1 hour photo shoot. That needs to be over with. So I like to do that. I like to kind of automate as much as I can. I am not a post-processing kind of person. I don't want to spend my time staring at the computer screen. I would rather be shooting or playing with the kids. So the more I can minimize my computer time, the happier I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think even your background in shooting film, this is something we're talking about earlier in the day, is the age you were when the film to digital transition was starting to happen. I think you were in the right spot at the right time, age-wise, to not be completely resistant to the new technology, but also being cautious enough, I guess, being cautious, but also being open to what it could do. So I think it's a very interesting perspective. Would you speak more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, I started shooting in high school on film, shot all the way through college before we ever saw a digital camera. I graduated college in 1997. The place that I was working at the time, we bought Nikon's first digital SLR. That was a standalone Nikon. There was the conglomerations that we had with Kodak, the DCS series, I guess they were, the $50,000 1 megapixel cameras back then. We did not have any of those, but we bought Nikon's first digital, and we saw that it could be helpful, but it was just rife with problems. The raw files weren't great. There wasn't much you could do with raw at the time, and the JPEGs were just borderline awful if they didn't have their color profiles and things quite right. So you would see a lot. The cameras we had a very strong magenta tint to them all the time, and so we were always having to color correct that out. And again, we weren't doing that from RAW. We were just trying to get that right from a JPEG. So they were quirky, but you could see like the benefits of the speed, especially, which has spoiled our world today. Do a business headshot, and it used to be a week turnaround to get them proofs in 2 or 3 days, and then get them their 5x7s they were going to submit to the paper. That was a week or two process for a headshot, and then digital brought it around, and you could shoot them, print it, and they could leave with it, and that was pretty huge. But to kind of circle back on the beginning of that, like we said, having that film background where you had to really slow down and get things right in the camera. You had to get your exposure right. You had to know how to get your exposure right. You didn't get an instant review. You had to know what it was you were doing and have the confidence that it was going to come out right on the back end of that. And so having that trained discipline has really helped when it comes to the digital side, because I still shoot very much from that approach. I know what I want it to look like. I set up my lighting accordingly, and the review is just kind of that nice confirmation that, yeah, that's right. And no, I don't always get that right, but that's helpful, so you go make those corrections. And so in that respect, digital's made you a better photographer from that, but not so much if you just rely on it to be your canvas, to where I shoot one and I'm going to go move this, and I'm going to shoot another one, then I'm going to go move that. I don't like that approach, and so I don't use that approach.
And I guess the next step of that would be, I guess, a more recent example of a change in the industry would be mirrorless, shooting with mirrorless. Because I know you're friends with Jeremy Smith. It seems like you guys are pretty tight knit. I see you guys commenting on each other's stuff all the time, and it's really funny to see kind of the playful banter between Sony and Nikon. Because I believe you're still very much a Nikon shooter to this day. Are you shooting on the Nikon mirrorless?
Only a little bit. It's mainly been more from opportunity, just the expense with switching over the system. I know I can use the FTZ adapter and use my current lenses with it, but that's not the way I like to do. I don't like adapters. I don't like mixing things. So I haven't plunged into it. I have rented them on occasion and shot with them. Love them. They have their place, just like when digital first came in. It was all new and different, and mirrorless is very much that way to an old school shooter. It's a different feel, a different way of operating the camera. So I don't do a lot of that. I have bought a small mirrorless that's my family and vacation camera. I take it and use it for those reasons, and it's helping me transition in my mind, because it takes me a bit to adapt to that style of shooting. But yeah, Jeremy and I go back and forth, because he's very hardcore about his Sony, and he's very hardcore about mirrorless. And as I mentioned off camera, I'm very much just give me any camera and I'll make it do what I need it to do. It's harder for me to do that with the mirrorless, because I don't know where settings are. I don't know where the menus are and the things like that. But it's fun to mess with him because when he makes a post about Sony, I'll usually throw something in there about Nikon, and he'll do the same to me. So it's kind of fun. It keeps me educated as to what the new technology is and what's going on. But then I keep him in his place that Nikon stuff's really better anyway. So.
In all of your years of shooting, do you have any stories that you can tell us, maybe some embarrassing ones, whether that's embarrassing to you or maybe something awkward that happened with a client? Of course, keep all of that, all those names anonymous. We don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but do you have any funny stories you'd like to share?
Like I said, I was doing college work, working for a yearbook. All of that kind of stuff was candid. You just went to the events and captured what happened. It was very journalistic. Then I was working at the portrait studio right after college, and we had done a few weddings, and just like anybody else would be, you're nervous, you don't want to mess up the bride's special day, things like that. And I never really let that get to me. The first few weddings were very nerve-wracking. I'd just be sweating bullets, legitimately sweating when I got there. I was so nervous, just a pit in your stomach of what am I doing? Do I really know what I'm doing for this? So those nerves will lead you to mistakes that maybe you wouldn't have made if you didn't get so nervous. So I had made it through. I'd probably shot 30 weddings maybe at this point in my career. And we had a fairly prominent photographer that everybody knew at least in the state. He was unable to do a particular wedding that he was booked for due to a family crisis, whatnot. He wasn't going to be able to do this. I knew his name, but I didn't by reputation, but I'd never met him. And the way that I like to tell the story, it was right as I was starting off in my business on my own, springtime, it was May, and any photographer worth their salt was already booked with weddings, and he had this come up and he wasn't going to be able to shoot the wedding. So I get the phone call, hey, can you go do a wedding for him? I was like, sure, of course I'll go.
This was how much time in advance?
2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Maybe 2 weeks. And so I said, sure, I'll go do this. It was a 3-hour drive to where the wedding was going to be for me. And they said the photographer wasn't going to be there, but his wife would be there because she's already done all the conversations with the bride and groom, and they're aware that they're not getting the original man, but so they're open to it. They have no problems. We started shooting photos, and we were still shooting Hasselblad. I think we were shooting 12 exposure backs, so we had 12 shots and you change film. And I got to about the 6th or 7th group photo of families, and I was like, I should have run out of film by now. And sure enough, I looked down at the film back and it had no film in it. All the other film backs had film, but I had the one on the camera that didn't have film in it. And so somehow I managed to pull myself together and just take that film back off. I called his wife over and I said, I need to reshoot those groups. Help me, basically, help me save face, but at least we caught it. Just tell them we need to redo those groups. And so we did it without a hitch. The bride and groom never knew that I shot the first part of their wedding photos without filming the camera. So that sticks with me, and it's a little on the embarrassing side, but not too bad, because as a professional, you try to recover from anything of that nature instead of letting it ruin their day. So there was that.
At least it wasn't during the ceremony. You're
No,
just
it
like,
wasn't during the
oh
ceremony or any
no,
of that.
I didn't get them coming in.
Yeah. And so no, we always did pictures before, so it was as tame of a mistake as it could have been. But if nothing else, it really broke the ice between me and his wife, because the nervous level was just so high. And I think for her too, because she didn't know me. She didn't know, did I know what I was doing? Clearly not. I didn't have film in the camera. But we became really good friends. They actually hired me on the spot the following week, and I worked for a year for them following that. But and I'll say, for the photographers that know me, if you know what that story is all about. And then I'd like to throw in another one is, when you're young, you're eager to learn. I'm a very obsessive kind of person, so in college and early career, I would eat, drink, and sleep photography. I would read every magazine I could get my hands on. It was before you could Google anything. That didn't exist. So anything anybody was willing to teach me, I was eager for. And when I was working at the portrait studio, one of his good friends that had been in business for 20-something years as well, he was just trying to mess with me. And he's like, you know how to choose the proper filter? And I was all ears, and then he gave me some bogus answer, and just, we all had this good laugh about it, but he was having fun with my eagerness to learn. And then just a year or two after that episode, the guy that did the wedding for, he did the same thing to me, and I was just as gullible as I could be. I dropped a roll of film, and as serious as he could say it, he said, they're all going to be out of focus now. And I just froze. I was like, oh my God, I just ruined that roll of film. And he got a good chuckle at the look on my face, and then after I had time to process it, I realized that was not the case. But now I take that and I use that for newbies that drop a memory card. I tell them they just knocked them all out of focus.
Oh yeah, because I definitely remember those things too, and you're just absorbing as much as you possibly can.
Absolutely.
And then, years later, you're like, I think they just wanted me to go get them coffee. I think
that's probably exactly right. That's exactly right.
I think they're clearly just using me.
Yeah. I'm going to spin off of that though, because that made me think a little bit about my approach to shooting. I mentioned I'm off camera. I'm pretty old school. Most of my training came from photographers that had been in business for 20 or 30 years prior to me, and all of their experience was film. And there was some guidelines, I'll call them now, that everybody kind of followed. They were sort of the standards for portraits, and we see now trends that are breaking away from those trends. And I can't hardly shoot like that because it's just so ingrained in my brain to shoot like this. And what I'm learning from that now is I'm pushing myself to break those rules because it limits you significantly. If you just go, that's the right way to do it and nobody else is doing it wrong, you're not helping anybody learn by having that attitude, but you're also not learning yourself. You're not growing in styles and opportunities. So kind of don't let that eagerness to learn also be what locks you into saying this is the right way to do it. Don't let that be your only source of input.
Well, and what are some of those trends that you're seeing that you initially were just resistant to, and now you're starting to, accept them a little bit more?
Well, one of those we already talked about, and that's shooting wide open. It has its place. There's times that's the right look, or what's grown me into accepting that more is some of the jobs I do where that's just shy of required because of the lack of light. I don't have a choice. I've got to shoot wide open, and I'm cranking the ISO up way past my comfort level because I need to shoot wide open. And when you get those looks right, you go, oh, well, that's another option. Now I have that in my bag. I can do that when I need to do that, or if I want to do that, which doesn't come up often. But so that's one that I'm not opening up to so much. But I do shoot people a little bit wider lens than I used to because of that. I'll kind of make that contrast. One of my old school teachings, I can't stand to see a headshot done with anything shorter than about an 85 millimeter on a DSLR. There's distortion and stretching that happens that's just not right for a human face, and so I don't like doing that. But at the same time, I'm now shooting primarily on location, and I'm often crammed in some little bitty conference room or somebody's office, and the choice is shoot them with a 50 or, heaven forbid, wider. and that's just what you have to do. So I can kind of accept it, but I won't do it on purpose. So.
Well, the handful of times I've done real estate photography, which is an entirely different animal, I don't know why, but it would seem like every house that I started shooting, after my first year, it seemed like every bathroom got smaller. Like I had the curse of this small bathroom, and every bathroom was smaller than the last. And so thankfully I had my 16-35 f4 with me at the time, and that worked out really well. But man, sometimes I couldn't go back far enough, and even to the point I had to shoot, put it to 20 millimeters or 24 millimeters, and then shoot a few times, stitch it together, and then find my cropping. And I'm like, it has to work now.
Yes. Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that particular thing. One of my bigger niches is aircraft photography. I've photographed a ton of aircraft. Worked with a manufacturer for a little while. And then I also photograph used aircraft that are going up for sale. And so it's very much the same approach as real estate photography, but you're in a 6-foot round metal tube and there is no space. So it became very interesting. And when you mentioned the bathroom, you've not seen anything like you've seen trying to photograph the bathroom of a private jet, where if it wasn't for having tripods that can contort themselves into all kinds of weird shapes and angles and things. You can't do it because it's literally maybe 2.5 feet wide by maybe 6 feet wide at the most, and they want a full view of the vanity across from the toilet. So I would multiple times use wireless tethering so that I can use live view mode, set the camera into the bathroom on the tripod, and then I just reach in and turn the camera looking at the iPad until I get it where I need it, and things like that. So yeah, definitely, you know, I won't say why it doesn't have its place. I shot a lot of that with a 14, and then I started using tilt shift lenses that really helped that tremendously, mainly from that stitching perspective. I really like to be able to use my 19 millimeter and pan it up and down and stitch and get the vertical that way, and I can do 2 exposures and stitch those together and get the whole bathroom in the shot, where before you just couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, most definitely.
So,
and I'll have to show you the photo later. I'll put it here in the video. But I shot, my friend was selling her house, and I wanted to get a shot of, she had a bathtub over here, and then it was kind of a longer bathroom with a double vanity, and I knew I was going to partially be in the mirror, but I'm like, I can easily clone that out. I actually get in the bathtub, you know, it looked totally crazy, but I left the overhead lights on because I had just all the windows open, and I'm like, well, I'm kind of already in my spot, so I had to yell for her, and thankfully she was in the house, and she saw me and thought it was the funniest thing. So she took a picture of me and sent that to me because I'm like, no one's going to believe it, you know.
Oh yeah. But with that, you mentioned that funny story. I have had plenty of those shoots that my clients and my friends that see my posts on social media, they think it's all glamorous to photograph these multi-million-dollar jets, when the reality is I'm sitting there in a mesh hat because they make me wear that, sometimes even the cotton gloves because they don't want me to touch the interior stuff, and I will be sitting curled up underneath the tripod to stay out of the reflections, sitting there like this with my iPad trying to stay out of the shot, and often that's in the bathroom, so I don't know that it's all that glamorous really, but it's fun. I like the challenges of those kinds of things. Trying to solve that problem on the fly is pretty fun.
Definitely. Well, because it has to get done.
Yeah.
I mean, your name is on the line, so
Absolutely.
And you want to impress them. You want to hopefully do some more jets. You know?
Absolutely.
And you know, maybe as an added perk, get to fly on a jet. You know.
That hasn't happened. Well, it's happened once, but it doesn't happen very often.
What advice would you give to someone starting out in this line of work?
A couple of things. From a practical standpoint, I would say get a camera, get a 50 millimeter lens, go shoot. Don't let the gear overwhelm you. Don't think you have to have all of the gear to do all of the stuff. That comes later, after you really can appreciate what you need that tool for versus this tool and things like that. It's real easy. I've been on the camera sales side of this. It's easy to want all the accessories. It's fun. Toys are fun, but it's also very overwhelming. You can get lost in all of that and not actually learn the craft of doing it. And so yeah, really just kind of like we did early on in the film days when I got started. We had a Pentax K1000 with a 50 millimeter lens on it, and you figured out how to get your shots with what you had within reason. I mean, of course, a 50 is not going to shoot football, but you know, it shot almost everything else you had to shoot. So, you know, that's kind of my first go-to is just get the camera, learn those basics of controlling the camera. Don't be afraid of manual. I'm a very strong manual shooter. I rarely will use any of the automated modes on my cameras, just because I want that complete control. I want to make the camera do what I want it to do, more so than me being a subject of what it's doing. Mm-hmm. And so with that, it's real easy now, again, because the cameras are so smart and so good, that if you just grab a camera, turn it on, and go point it, you're probably going to get pretty decent photos. But do you learn anything from that? No, you need to make mistakes. You need to shoot it in manual and try to figure out why in the world that background's too bright, or why this person's too dark, or those things, and learn the actual process of photography. So with that, it's kind of an interesting transition, is get a film camera, go shoot some film. You will learn so much more, so fast, if you learn to get some stuff right on film, because it's not anywhere near as forgiving as digital. You don't have the luxury of just, I'll fix that later. You've got to do it. So that's really one of the best things. And now that film is kind of resurging again, I guess, what's old is new again, millennials are now discovering film, thinking they found something new that's existed for 100-something years. Yeah, shoot some film, make those mistakes, and learn it. It's I'll say that's an expensive mistake, but what education isn't? So with that, I've actually brought a darkroom back into production now. I use a darkroom at home and have started shooting film again, just for special assignments, mainly personal projects, and I want the next generation. I'm teaching my children how to shoot film. They're 9 and 5 years old, and they both have Nikon SLRs, and we shoot film together just so they can process it and see the way it works.
Well, and they've only known a world with, you know, phones and tablets.
Absolutely.
Where, you know, that was readily available. Mom and dad have something that is immediate satisfaction. Yep. We took a family photo. How does it look? No, let's do another one, you know. Whereas with the film, especially with, I guess, younger millennials and the Gen Z didn't grow up with film, or it was when they were way younger, it is kind of exciting for them to kind of get into it again, and realize that I have to work for every image.
That's right. As a business person, I'm doing this from a business standpoint. We were shooting medium format film for our portrait work in the studio, and you figured out your cost that you had a 12 exposure roll, and I guess at the time that I was doing that, it was about $1.50 a shot just to push the button on the camera. So you knew how much you were charging your senior just for their session, and you had, you know, what's now a $15 or $20 roll of film, $10 or $15 worth of processing that film, maybe more if you did proofs, all of this stuff. So you had this big cost involved, and you were a lot more judicial with when you pushed that button, because it cost you a ton of money. In fact, I'll bounce back to another funny story with that, was while I was in college and I wasn't the one footing the bill at the studio, my mentor gave me the chance to photograph a friend of mine and just said, yeah, y'all have a good time and do this shoot. And so she and I went in the studio one evening after work, and we shot for a couple of 3 hours. I don't remember how long we did a ton of outfits. And next thing you know, I had shot 15 rolls of 120 and about 100 Polaroids. And he was not very happy with what that session cost us. If I remember right, I think I paid for that one. But anyway, it would teach you to be judicial with your resources, because now you throw a memory card in and you have 1,500 frames at your disposal, and it doesn't matter if you waste all of them. So,
right.
You know, so I don't tend to overshoot also because of that. I still tend to keep it pretty tight, 4 or 5 frames on a subject, and move to the next thing. And you've either got it or you don't. And,
right.
And you have that review, so you know you've got it, so move on. Why keep shooting at the same thing? Because that's just going to eat up your processing time.
There's no reason to stress about it later or lose sleep over it, you know.
Or waste 2 hours combing through 50 extra shots on that subject when you had it in the first 3 anyway.
Oh, definitely. Could you speak to, I guess, how you price your work, and I guess keeping it high enough that it's not highway robbery, but also not low enough that you're not making up for the time that you spent in your resources there?
Yeah, absolutely. Pricing is something that we all chase, and we're always trying to figure it out. I don't know that too many people have all the answers. They might, in their interview videos, might say they do or project that they do, but really it boils down to, you've got to take an internal look at what are your costs involved, figure out, you know, like I work from home, so a portion of my expenses for the house, the mortgage and the utilities and all of that is still considered a legitimate business expense. So you have to look at, what does it cost me to do business? You know, if I'm not working at all this week, I still have to pay out this amount of money, essentially. So how much do I need to make in a week? Then you can break that down to, well, that's how many hours do I want to work a week, or, you know, whatever. So then you kind of work backwards into it, and you go, well, then in the commercial side, we usually use an hourly rate for a lot of things. So you just kind of have to figure out a price point of, okay, well, it costs me this much per hour to even operate, but I want to make money, so I'm going to add this to that amount. And that kind of gets you a base of what you need to charge to cover yourself. But then the other flip side of that is, you also have to value the work to the client, what they are getting for their money, how are they using it. In the commercial world, we talk a lot about usage and usage rights. In my particular market and with my clientele, I don't get too ticky about that. It's pretty loose that they get the images, use them how they need to, but I make sure I price that for me where I'm comfortable with that number, so that once they have the images, it's kind of a win for me, because they're not calling me every couple of months wanting me to go dig up this old image and do something to it and send it back to them again. It's done. I've walked away from that job, been paid, and we're ready for the next thing. And that's worked real well for my clientele, because they just, most of what I do, they want something new and fresh every couple of months. They don't want to dig up the old stuff. So I keep that priced where it's a kind of a consumable almost for them. Mm-hmm. They use these photos, and they call me and have me make some new ones for them. So I'm getting paid again and get to shoot again, and then they use those up and we come back and visit that again. So you kind of have to price that, but then at the same time, I don't do a lot of prints anymore. I don't sell a lot of prints anymore.
It's shifted.
It's shifted
from a lot of print work. That's how a lot of people in the 80s and 90s, that's how they made their money. It wasn't the sitting fee.
In fact, the sitting fee really kind of originated from, what does the roll of film cost me? What does the roll of processing and proofing cost me? I've got to pay my employee for an hour for the sales session, you know. So you kind of calculated your session fee out of that, but that money was already spent by the time they came into order. So you relied on selling prints to make your money. And, you know, I think it's crucial to sell prints. I still sell them for my portrait work. I just don't do a lot of portrait work, so I don't sell a lot of prints. You know, you read in the forums, everybody asks, well, what should I charge for this? Currently in a drone forum that every single day somebody's like, well, I've got this scenario, what should I charge? And nobody can tell you that. You've got to be able to just know what your costs are, know what you want to make from that, and then roll from there.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting point about even the print side. I know maybe not for the corporate world, it may not be as interesting because it's mostly digital anyway. You're using it for business cards, you're using it for you know, an emailer or something like that. But I will say, even just as someone, you know, on the consumer side, getting a print of whether it's a senior photo or an engagement or even a family photo, having an 8x10 and holding it and then handing it to somebody and going, oh, look at this. It has a different emotional connection rather than you put it on your iPad. Yep. Or you're sending it to somebody else on their phone, because these are great, but yes. It's such a small screen. I mean, this is smaller than a 4x6, you know.
Yes. And I mean, I'm right there. We all do it because it's the world we live in now. I've got pictures of my kids that are the wallpaper on my phone, so I see their sweet faces every time I pick my phone up. But that will never in my mind replace those beautiful baby portraits we had made that are hanging on the wall over the couch. They're huge, and you see them and it brings a smile to your face. An older photographer from the Jonesboro market, Arkansas folks probably know the name, Tom McDonald. I guess in the 90s when I met him and went to his week-long photography seminar, he was probably already in his 70s or so at that time. So, you know, he passed a few years back. But one of the things that I picked up from his seminar was that children need to have family photos in their bedrooms. You know, put a picture of mom and dad in the bedroom, put the whole family in the bedroom, even with the dog, or, you know, whatever. But it makes them connect and feel like they're part of that family to see those photos in their rooms. So I've made sure that at our house, our kids have family photos and photos of themselves or the sibling right there in their room. It's really there and it's important. And, you know, there I was, naive 20-something year old, and that's what stuck to me out of that class that was on posing family portraits or, you know, shooting a 1-year-old smash cake thing. That's what we spent the week doing. But the thing that I brought home from that was make sure the kids see themselves. So, yeah, they play with our phones and they see some of the pictures, but it's still just not the same.
Exactly. I mean, there's photos I've taken on my phone that were a year ago or 6 months ago that I'm like, I forgot I took those. Yeah. Because it's almost disposable at that point. Yeah.
Or if you look through your camera roll on your phone, I would venture to say 90% of those you would never print and hang up anyway. That's not what those are meant for. But if you don't do that, then what are you going to do? So you've got to be intentional about it. I mean, it makes for a great sales pitch. As photographers, we're here to make money and sell stuff. We work on an emotional basis. And so, you know, remind those mamas, you need a print for the kids. You need, you know, not just grandma doesn't need a picture, the kids need one too, you know, that kind of thing. So,
what is a tangible item, some sort of accessory that you bring on every shoot with you, something that is a non-negotiable that you have to have with you?
I'm going to say it's going to be my tripod. Again, I keep calling myself an old school photographer. The cameras that I used in the 90s, those things were big, heavy, and you're shooting at relatively slow shutter speeds. You didn't have a choice but be on a tripod, especially if you were shooting all day or doing volume work like schools and things of that nature. You just couldn't do that handheld. Your arm would fall off. And it's just a preferred way. I like to slow down, and tripods are cumbersome and slow, and they make you kind of be intentional again to get things lined up where you want, and you just can't beat being steady. If you've ever shot with a long lens at a 60th and then looked at those headshots, they're not sharp. They might be sharp enough to get by, but they're not sharp. And in fact, we do some volume type things, dance schools, school pictures, things like that, and we always use a camera stand for that. Those are notorious for being studio items. People usually have those in big commercial studios. We found it to be the most useful for high volume portrait work, where literally you might have a class of 3-year-olds, then all of a sudden they say, well, we're bringing in some 7th graders. Well, that's almost 2 more feet you got to raise the camera, and you shoot 3 people, and they say, well, there's this one 3-year-old that missed that class, she's coming back in. It's just so cumbersome to adjust 3 legs, try to get it level again. You weren't at the right height, so you got to adjust them again. Now you're at the right. You've wasted, maybe it's only 2 or 3 minutes, but 2 or 3 minutes when you're shooting hundreds of kids is a lot of minutes. And so having that camera stand where you can just squeeze it, you can drop literally to the floor. You have the camera 6 inches off the floor, or you can have it 8 feet in the air, all in the one stroke. Just stop where you want, and it's perfectly level. It really doesn't get any better than that.
What is an intangible, something that you always keep in your mind with you on a shoot?
It's really, again, being commercial driven more than anything. It's really about the end product. I get all the information I can on the front end of this shoot. How are you guys going to use this? Is it going to be in a magazine? Is it going to be on a billboard? Is it website? I've got a client that I shoot a bunch of stuff for, that it's for their website, and they have a certain banner size at the top of their frame that it's not 16 by 9. I don't know what that relationship is, but it's really long and narrow. And so I kind of prep myself before each shoot. It's like, okay, these things are going to be banner shots. No to leave a ton of extra space. I like to use all of my pixels. I like to crop in camera. I like to crop it about how I meant for it to be seen in camera. And when I shoot for that client, they're constantly fussing at me going, make it wider. I need room. I need room on the ends. So that's a big part. It's just, you get to be creative in commercial work. A lot of times they just trust you to make things happen. They're like, here, make my product look great. Other times it's more of a, give me all the information, tell me what you want, and I will make that happen for you. But really, I may spend more time thinking about being a professional presentation of yourself, dressing appropriate for the job that you're doing. That's something that people don't really talk about a lot anymore, and you don't really get taught it in school. I'm thankful that I'm very thankful that I took a lot of my college time in business courses, and the college I mentioned I do headshots for is a college of business, and that's why they want professional headshots for their students. And they have a whole class on basically dressing for success, how to present yourself business-wise, and they have etiquette training for the students, and I think that's really neat because they take them to a big lunch. Some of these people have never been to a catered lunch or formal event. These students don't know. They're 18, 19. So they take them to a lunch like that and just kind of expose them to it and kind of walk them through. It's not your full-on debutante type stuff, but it's, kind of a refresher of proper table manners, how to present yourself, not to eat before everybody else has been served, those kinds of things. I get to witness those by being at their event. I'm there getting paid to do my job, but I learned from that. And you go, wow, I really should, maybe I should dress a little bit nicer for this shoot. I'm going to the bank this morning. I might not ought to show up in my jeans and t-shirt on Monday. Do that on Friday. When they're all in their jeans, you just little things like that. So I'll approach a shoot a lot from that side of things. It's just, how do I make their experience the best? A lot of commercial photography, at least, is putting on a show, is what I like to say. My client this morning even commented on the amount of equipment that I brought in for that particular shoot, and it was somebody I'm close to. I know them well enough to tease, even though they're writing the check. I was like, a lot of it's part of the show. It's to make the people you're photographing feel like you know what you're doing and you're doing something with all this stuff. So that kind of helps justify my invoice at the end of the day. But at the same time, it's just all of that. You just go, man, what do they need to see? You know, sometimes it's that same client that I've shot for them for 20 years. They know what it actually takes versus I don't have to put on a show for them. I can bring what I need, get it done. Let's get out of here, go to lunch, that kind of thing. So.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to Jason. And if you would like to see more of these, let us know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our other Bedford Talks series, please check that out in the playlist.